Right, hi everybody and welcome to our first webinar on project management. We are going to leave the questions for the end, if you'd be so kind as to just hold off on the questions for now, and we'll get through and have a look at what project management is. And like I said, we will answer the questions that anybody might have at the end, if you don't mind just holding off on your questions. So let us get started. All right, so thanks everyone today for joining. I'm happy to have you all here. I see that there are a few more people joining us, so we might have a few latecomers. That's okay. Once you start working on project management, I think we'll be a bit more prompt, hopefully. So let us get started. All right. So my name is Ryan. I obviously work for ITonlinelearning. I've been here for 7 years. I've been helping people with project management for many years, especially with their training and their preparation for the exams. So today we're going to be covering what is project management, just our very first webinar. For those of you that are a little bit further ahead in your project management journey at the moment, it's still informative, still good to have a look at. We are going to progress slowly towards some of the other methodologies, and we are going to take a little bit of time out to go into a little bit more detail later on. So this one might seem a little bit more general for those of you that have got a little bit more into your training and you are students with us. For those of you that aren't and you're perhaps joining us for the first time, thank you very much for joining. Hopefully we might have a training solution that fits you, or we might inspire you to perhaps take part in some project management. So let's get started, shall we? Now, first and foremost, what is project management? All right, we're going to have a look at that now. Now, by definition, there are a few different sort of definitions, and you could more than likely make up your own one if you really, really wanted to. But project management is, by definition, the application of processes, methods, and skills, knowledge and experience. And that knowledge and experience, along with the other ones mentioned, are there to achieve specific project objectives. And those are according to acceptance criteria with agreed parameters. Now, acceptance criteria, if you are wondering, is usually a prioritized list of requirements that your project needs to meet in order for it to gain acceptance, for it to be deemed as acceptable for your product to meet its standards, basically. Project management also has final deliverables, and they are constrained to a finite timescale and budget. So a finite timescale would mean that there is a starting point and there is an end point to the project itself. Now, if we want to look at different definitions for a project, I'll look at the PRINCE2 definition first, because PRINCE2 is very traditional project management methodology. I know a lot of you are doing PRINCE2 and you'd be aware of what we define PRINCE2 as. But PRINCE2 is a temporary organization. They define it as a temporary organization that is created for the purpose of delivering one or more business products according to an agreed business case. If we looked at the project management body of knowledge, or the PMBOK, they would define a project as a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique project, service, or result. So that helps us to cover the definition first and foremost of what project management is. We can now move on to the next bit. So next up, we're going to be looking at the characteristics of a project. Now, once again, with a traditional project management approach, something sort of like Waterfall that we are going to cover shortly, I'm going to go with PRINCE2's characteristics of a project for you, first and foremost. Now, as you'll see on the slide over here, very firstly, change. Yeah. Now, you'll hear the word change quite a lot when it comes to projects. Now, a characteristic of a project is change. A project is a means by which we introduce a change, and that change is introduced to business as usual. It's something that needs to change within an organization, so it is one of those characteristics of project management. We then move on to temporary. Projects are also temporary. They're temporary in nature. So that means that they start at some point and they will end at some point. They are not going to be infinite. They're not going to carry on forever. If they did, I think I'm yet to see one of those. They're also cross-functional. Now, when we say cross-functional, guys, a cross-functional element means that there are teams of people, people with different skills, and they might come from different departments, but they're all sort of working together on the common goal. You've got people with different levels of skills and they contribute different elements to your project. However, they all come together quite nicely at the end if we do things properly, that is. Unique is also, once again, another one of the project management characteristics. Why is it unique? Well, projects are unique in their own right because it has never been done before. Each and every project is unique in its own right. Even projects that are very, very similarly aligned, are also still going to be unique in their own right due to the variables involved. Uncertainty and risk are also some of the other characteristics of a project. Now, the aforementioned ones prior to this, change, temporary, cross-functional, and unique, they would introduce threats and opportunities above what we would encounter in business as usual. And we will talk a little bit about business as usual shortly, but those are the sort of PRINCE2 characteristics of a project. Now, some of the other ones that you look at are, for example, there's objectives involved in a project. They are single entity. They require funds. There's a life cycle to the projects. There's some team spirit involved. Risk and uncertainty, which we have covered there, is also one of those. You can see over here. Directions, uniqueness. Remember, each and every project is unique in its own right. Flexibility as well, subcontracting. So in many instances, if we are using the cross-functional element, and we would need subcontracting because we need people with different skills, and there might not be people that possess those skills within the organization that needs to change. We also then have costs, and costs are obviously a very important part of any project because things cost money, as we would all know, and projects do sort of revolve around costs and in return on investments. Now, as we move forward, we are going to look at what the purpose of a project is. Now, a project is there to achieve specific and strategic goals. They're done so systematically and they're done so in a controlled manner. So let's go back to the basics here. Why do we do projects? What are they for? Well, they help organizations, they're vehicles that help organizations to learn and to change and to adapt and to improve or adopt new processes, products, and also maybe new technologies that need to come on. They're also associated with changing something. Now, we've mentioned this word change, and we're going to use the word change. And in our next couple of webinars, we will be looking at change, perhaps in a little bit more detail. So projects are associated with changing something, yeah? And simply but not forgotten, the primary aim of a project is to benefit the business. That's what's very, very important. Now, we can move on to our next slide over here. Now, as we go into this slide, we're going to take a look at the sort of traditional view of business as usual. Now, I'm sure some of you that are a little bit further ahead in your studies, those of you that are joining us for the first time might also know what business as usual is. But if we look at business as usual, it's a steady state. Business as usual is your Monday to Friday, your January to December, your 9 to 5, your steady state that takes place within your organization on a day-to-day basis. So each and every one of you has a job. You go to your job. I would say, hopefully you don't do the same thing every day. There's a bit of variety, but generally speaking, that's our business as usual. It's the steady organization. So a company has products that they are going to be producing. They might want to produce as many of them as possible, so that they can sell as many of them as possible. So in that steady state, they can continue to build steadily over time. And if it's an organization that produces one particular product, they would probably produce that product, like we said, January to December, Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. But what happens is environments will change and our companies need to change and adapt to that. So an individual project might be about improving manufacturing methods or techniques, or developing a new product, finding new markets, for example. And the project will detail the change. Now, all projects are about change. And again, you must be thinking, gee, this guy talks a lot about change, doesn't he? But change is very, very interesting, because people and organizations are often resistant to change initially before they realize the merit within that particular project, and what it has to offer and what it has to offer the organization. So why do we need change? This key word that we're throwing around so much today. Why do we need change? Well, businesses can't stay the same while the environment around them changes. The world evolves every day. There's new technologies. Sometimes there's a new stick thrown in the spoke. You know, people have gone through COVID, where organizations have had to change dramatically. And unfortunately, you know, on a sad note, many of them have had to shut down. So new competitors can arise. Economic conditions may alter. Suppliers may go out of business. So companies that don't react to change, or don't do something about the change, will actually fall behind, because there are companies that will do so and they will adapt. So these companies will end up making the changes, and as you can see over here, they will end up on our slides. If they don't make the changes, they could possibly take our market share away from us. And the companies that take market share will eventually drive our company that hasn't changed out of business, which we don't want. You know, you don't want new business to go out of business. Now, so we need to deliver a project. The project is there to benefit the business. So the project there is the means to drive that change that needs to happen, so that we can in fact roll with the times. We can in fact stay in business. We can in fact incorporate new technologies and bring on new people perhaps, or anything that requires any sort of change would obviously have benefits involved. So the benefit can take many forms. So there would be an output of the project. We'll usually either directly save the company money or make the company money. So we were talking earlier on about, you know, business as usual. And just going through outputs over here, what I want to address is, you know, an example of what an output would be from the project. So an output would be, for example, your organization has a need to change. Perhaps your systems are a lot slower. Maybe they're a little bit outdated. You're unable to process your orders for your sales very, very quickly. And maybe you decide that, well, we maybe need a new sales system that we need to bring on board here. So an output would be something like a new sales system, but then that would create for us an outcome from that output. Now that outcome would be that your sales orders could be produced a lot faster and more quickly, more accurately. And from that output that brought about that outcome, we would then be able to have a benefit and realize a benefit. Now a benefit then from that would be, well, output, new sales system. Outcome, sales orders are processed more quickly. Benefit is, well, costs are reduced by 20%. The volume of sales is increased by 30%. The annual turnover is perhaps increased by 20%. So benefits can take many forms. And, you know, a project may develop a new product to be sold or improve their manufacturing, reduce their costs. So only a generalization though, but it may be that the project itself only touches perhaps on the financial side. And that would be so indirectly. A project may improve brand awareness about your company and about your organization. If more people are aware of your company and are more aware of your brand, well, that's pretty good for business, I'd say. And it could also lead to increased sales. You know, the project itself won't deliver those increased sales itself, but those increased sales would obviously be a benefit of that particular outcome that stemmed from that particular output. So that's why we do projects. Yeah, we bring change into the business and we benefit the business. Now, a first sort of project management concept that you sort of learn is that the primary aim is to actually benefit the business. So let's move on to our next slide. So projects involve project management methodology. So to bring about this change and to manage this change effectively, we need to have a method. We need to have our operating system, I guess, a system that we're going to use to manage our project. So what is a methodology, you may ask? Well, a methodology is a set of principles and practices that guide you in organizing your project so that you can ensure optimum performance of the project. So you might say, what do you mean? Well, guys, it's a framework that helps you manage your project in the best possible way. But remember, methodologies are often tailored, and certain methodologies might work in one particular area and might not do so well in other particular areas. So it's very, very important. So project is very, very important to organizations and to teams. In order for your project management to be effective, you have to correctly map your methodology, your team type, and match it to your team type, to your project and its needs, perhaps, your organization and your goals of your organization. So that's what a methodology is. It's, like I said, it's a set of principles and practices that guide you in organizing your projects and to ensure that you get optimal performance. So we can now move on to our next slide over here. So you might ask, why are there so many project management methodologies? Well, no two projects are the same. Even with templates that you might have to replicate your past successes, your projects are never going to be exactly the same. So when you factor your different goals, your organization's different KPIs, and your different production methods, perhaps, of your different teams and industries, it makes sense that there is no sort of one-size-fits-all approach to project management. You know, if you go into a shop, for example, and you're going to look for a new pair of running shoes, the summer's here and everybody's New Year's resolution is to go out there and start doing some running. You're going to go and look for some running shoes. So you go into your favorite sneaker shop, perhaps, or shop that sells running shoes. Perhaps you like Nike or Reebok or Adidas. So you go in there, and it's not just one type of shoe. It's not just one type of size. Certain people might like a certain fit. Somebody might like something more of a running shoe, something like a high top, maybe somebody that plays basketball. So what works best for one type of team could perhaps be a nightmare for other. That's why I say that, you know, we have to select the right approach. The same way is depending on what methodology you use. If you're using PRINCE2, for example, one of our principles is to tailor to suit the project environment. And that shows you that there is no one size fits all. Projects have got different sizes, different scales, different complexity that they have sort of associated with them. So, for example, software developers have found that traditional project management methods were rather hindering. They were, rather than helping their workflows, they were negatively affecting their performance and their results. Then they began to develop a new type of project management methodology designed to address their particular concerns. So other teams and industries started to adapt to new project management methodologies and find one that had, that fitted their unique concerns and their organization. So we could go on and on with different methodologies being repurposed and adapted to different industries and tweaked to fit use cases. Now, we could be left with a whole ton of them to look at and to choose from. So a good question would be, how do you know which project management method or methods is right for you and for your team? Well, the landscape of project management methodologies might seem a little bit overwhelming. You might be thinking, gee, there's a whole lot of them. Do I need to maybe study all of these? Do I need to know all of these? Depending on your organization, there's methodologies that you can look at that would generally fit. And we usually, I wouldn't say two categories, but you'd have something very traditional and you'd have something a little bit more adaptive these days. So you could basically go into an all-you-can-eat restaurant to a buffet and have all this different food that you can select from. And it's the same in this world. You can select from various methodologies. Now, some of them might be methodologies to choose from to use. You might have certain levels of experience. You might want to validate your skills and do a certification, or you might have a certification and you might be looking to gain experience. So often each and every one of these comes with their own rules, their own lists, their own principles, and often a whole lot of acronyms, I'm sure. So finding the right project management to manage and use on your project and within your organization, it shouldn't really be rocket science at the end of the day. So we're going to now move on to actually looking at some of these. So you might ask, well, what is the best project management methodology for you and for your team? Okay. Now I'm going to look at Waterfall first. All right. Waterfall is a very traditional approach to project management. Okay. Your tasks are completed in a linear, sequential manner. Each stage would need to be completed before you move on to the next stage. So I know that we have got a lot of people on the webinar today that are already perhaps doing PRINCE2 or have done PRINCE2, and you'll know that this sounds very, very familiar, doesn't it? We need to complete one stage, report on that stage, request permission to move on to the next stage, and have a stage plan for that next stage. So stages could follow this sort of sequence if we were looking at Waterfall. Yeah. So you would have, for example, let's have a look over here. Requirements, your analysis, your design, your construction, and then ultimately your testing, and then your deployment and the maintenance that might need to take place outside of the life cycle of the project that's just taken place. Now, with Waterfall, progress flows in one direction, as you can see over here, like this lovely image we've got of a waterfall. I don't know if anybody's ever been here before. If you have, let me know where this is. It flows in one process, just like a real waterfall. But like a real waterfall, you get torrential rains, perhaps. A waterfall can quite quickly become dangerous. So with Waterfall, everything is sort of mapped out. Yeah. And it mapped out at the beginning of the project. So there's lots of room for error sometimes if we do it that way, because our expectations might not meet our reality. Now, going back to, there's going to be no going back to a previous stage once it's been completed. So that's why I say it's very important that the right approach is selected. So let's just say, for example, we are using something like Waterfall on a project where we've now gone through a particular stage, and it's something that you can't undo. Yeah. And you now have progressed onwards. You haven't utilized any sort of stages. And let's just say the project was to build a house, and you weren't using something structured, like something like Waterfall. And you built the foundations, you built the first story, the second story, you've done the attic, and suddenly you realize, oh, hang on a second, we've got a big problem with our foundation here. Now, how easy do you guys think it would be to go back to the foundation and just go and fix the foundation when you've built 3 floors on top of that? Probably going to be a little bit difficult. That's going to impact our costs and our timescales considerably. And our investors and our stakeholders are probably not going to be too impressed. And that's why I say there's no going back to the previous stage. So imagine trying to swim against this waterfall. Imagine firstly probably doing a bit of climbing up here as well, but going against the grain, I guess you could say. So for Waterfall, guys, you try this methodology within your organization if your end goal of your project is clearly defined and it isn't going to change. The stakeholders know exactly what they want, and perhaps that's not going to change as well. Your project is consistent and it's predictable, so you don't foresee there being a lot of change. But in the real world, changes do happen, and very often they do, and sometimes very much in an unforeseen manner. So It also wouldn't work if you're working in a regulated industry that needs extensive project tracking and documentation. So you might need to bring new people into the project midway through and to get them up to speed. So that's when it would sort of work quite well for you, because, you know, something like Waterfall and something like PRINCE2, for example, is structured. It is based on best practice. It does look at managing a project in various stages. And if we looked at this, we probably want to ask the question, well, the project management methodology might not be for me if what? So if your project is liable to change, if you don't have a full picture of the requirements before you start the project, if you need continuous testing of the product to adapt to the feedback that you receive during the testing process, then Waterfall is probably not going to work for you. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you have heard of Agile. Now, we're going to move on to Agile next. Now, what is Agile? Okay. First and foremost, a lot of you would know that Agile is actually an umbrella term for a variety of different approaches, either lightweight or full approaches. Yeah. So Agile came from a growing dissatisfaction with the traditional linear approach of traditional project management methodologies. They were frustrated with the limitations that the project management methodologies had, and there was no adaptation to it. So focus began to shift to something more iterative, and an iterative model that would allow our teams to revise their projects as needed, instead of having to wait until the end of the project to actually review and amend, or even test for that matter. So Agile has actually sparked several specific sub-frameworks, and I'm sure you've heard a few of them: Scrum, Lean, Kanban. These are all other areas that you've heard of. So you can imagine Agile almost as an umbrella with these different approaches that are there. So what do they all have in common, having said a lot of these? Well, they all are collaborative. They are quick and open to data-driven change. They would involve short phases of work with frequent testing, frequent reassessment, and, you know, frequent adaptation as well. Now, in many Agile methods, all work is added to a backlog, basically, the teams can work through. So the project managers or the product owners prioritize the backlog, so the teams can obviously prioritize the work that needs to happen. So with Agile, you'll see that if we were just talking about something traditional, something like Waterfall, well, guys, we're going to have our PRINCE2. We're going to be talking about something adaptive, iterative, incremental, something different and adaptive, we would be having our Agile. So in moving on, you would try the Agile project management methodology if your project is liable to change. You're not sure at the outset what the solution will look like. You need to work quickly, and it's more important that you need to see speedy progress rather than perfect results right away. So we're looking at something like Agile, let's just say for software development, for example. You could get something fairly basic together, and through various cycles, you could then improve that and add to that, you know, whereas with Waterfall, it wouldn't really work that well. So you try Agile if your project is liable to change. If you're not sure at the outset what the solution will look like, you'll need to work quickly, and it's more important that you see speedy progress, perfect results, and your stakeholders, most importantly, or your client for that matter, would like to be involved at every stage of the project. So this project management methodology would probably not be for you or your organization if you need a lot of documentation, for example. You'll be bringing new people on board during the project. You need a predictable deliverable, and you need to be crystal clear about what it looks like from the outset. Your project perhaps can't afford to change during its course. You don't have self-motivated people. Remember, something like Agile revolves very much around pragmatism. And you it won't work for you if you have strict deadlines or deliverables that you need to stay on top of. Now we're going to move ahead into the next slide, because I'd like to just look at addressing any questions that you may have. Today's webinar is just a basic introduction to project management, and I assure you guys we are going to progress further into these methodologies. We can actually start looking at some of the key bits that make up these areas. Now, if you'd like, if anybody would like to comment in the Q&A section of the webinar, I will happily, get going, and we can start answering those questions. So the way we do it is, in the programs that we do, you could quite comfortably start out doing your PRINCE2 training first and foremost and get your PRINCE2 certification, basically following best practice first and foremost, something with a lot more structure and a lot more guidance, and then moving on to Agile. Our project management placement program, for example, you do PRINCE2 after your fundamentals course, and then you move into Agile after that, and then obviously change management following on from that. So that's a very good question. To be quite honest with you, on the programs that we offer, we ease you into your learning with project management fundamentals course first, which is a nice introduction to what project management is, what project managers do, how they perhaps deal with risk, for example, and that'll lead you into PRINCE2. I'm very fond of doing PRINCE2 first and foremost, and in a lot of our programs, students actually do so. Because it's based on a traditional method like Waterfall, it's got that structure and that governance, and it follows best practice. It's probably a good place to start, Richard, I would say. Certainly, that is actually a very, very good question, because remember, I just said that PRINCE2 needs to be tailored to the size and the complexity of each project. So in our initial meeting, if we have a bit of a kickoff, as we say in Agile, and we were sitting down, we would address these areas with our basic stakeholders and the people that are going to be involved. And you said contractors there, so it might be people from the supplier side. So absolutely, yes, we would need to sit down, have a look at the methodology that's going to fit the project best. We need to look at the size, scale, and complexity of that project, look at what variables are involved. And also remember, risks are very, very important. And when we say risks, a risk can present itself as either a risk, which sounds a little more negative, or in sometimes an opportunity as well. So that's a good question. But we do need in Agile, we collaborate, and in PRINCE2, we need to have very clearly defined roles and responsibilities. We need to manage a project by stages. And as we get into our next webinar, when we actually start going through some of these things, you'll see that we will start covering this, and it'll make a lot more sense. And I know that there are people here that are PRINCE2 certified and Agile certified, and are tuning into the webinar today. But there might also be a lot of people that are very new to it, and people that might even be joining us today and considering perhaps doing some trading with us. So these are things that we can discuss and things that you're going to learn. Absolutely. Outside of our, let's just say there's a big fence around our project that sort of gives us our scope, yeah? Remember that when the project is there, it's a temporary endeavor. It's a temporary organization. It's there, and it's finite. It's not infinite. It has a starting point and it has an end point. But remember that outside of that project's life cycle, once it's completed, once we've disbanded our teams and we've handed over, and that organization is going to be realizing those benefits, and change management is very, very important, and it ties in with you as a project manager, because change looks at people and how that affects people. So for example, we go back to that sales system. Now we bring this new sales system into a company. Now, if any of you guys are working in any organization where you might have a sales system or a CRM, how many of you have perhaps been working on it for years, working on the same system, business as usual, Monday to Friday, January to December, 9 to 5. You're working on that particular system, yeah? Now, we come into your organization and we say, right, so we're going to be putting in a whole new system, a whole new telephone system, a whole new CRM. And this has happened before. I've had a new system put in place, and I've been here for quite a long time. And having worked on that system, I know personally, people are hesitant to change. People don't want to change. People often see change as a negative thing. Oh, I'm going to not be able to do my work quickly now. I'm going to have to learn. There's going to be new training that I'm going to have to go through. And people in change management, as you would know, is that, Sokamel, the change does need to be managed, because people will be hesitant to that change. So people go through different emotions in a change. Often they're very hesitant. They go through these emotions where they're almost angry in a way, that there's a change. Now, I don't want to do this. I don't want to change. I've been doing this for 20 years. Why must I now change? But change management, it's about helping people transition through the change initiative, helping them to realize that, look, there's actually a benefit to me. There's a benefit to this organization. If I'm working in sales and I can process my leads a lot faster, that means I can contact more people on my new telephone system. I can take on more leads. I can make more sales. I can make more money at the end of the day. So change management is very, very important. And as a project manager, understanding what happens outside of the, as a peripheral, outside of your project area is very, very important. And it's a skill that you can add to your repertoire, because you might find that there's a transition that takes place in your career at some point. You might have managed a few projects and you realize, look, I'm a people person. I want to help manage the change more effectively. And, that's where it happens. And remember, often beyond the life cycle of a project, there's certain maintenance that needs to take place. Somebody might have to update that particular system. They might have to upgrade that system. They might have to do some training with the guys on that. So that's where change management is very, very important. So Sokamel, I hope that answers your question. The other one over here, let's have a look, see. That's a very interesting question. People often focused on industry, and they say, well, how do I work in construction if I don't have a construction background? Remember what a project manager actually does. Okay, a project manager is there to plan, monitor, delegate, and control. And when you use a methodology, for example, PRINCE2, we delegate authority down from one level to the next. Yeah, so a project manager could be working on a construction project, even if he is not the most experienced person in projects. Why? Because below him, there's a team level, people that supply us with specialist skills. So a project manager doesn't need to go and have to be a plumber and an electrician and an IT technician and a quantity surveyor and a bricklayer and a painter and somebody that puts windows in and does roofing. He would be wearing a hell of a lot of hats and running around quite a lot. So we delegate authority down to the next level of management. So if you're looking to decide what project management area to go into, yes, you can focus on particular areas. If you have a very strong IT background, perhaps you do want to go into IT-related project management. And that's when you will start looking at what the right method will be for you. Our programs that we offer do take our students through PRINCE2, Agile, and change management. It's part of your program, and it adds to that skill set that you have. I almost look at it as if you look at something one-dimensional. Let's look at it like a butter knife. You butter a piece of toast in the morning. That knife, it butters the toast quite nicely. It's not very sharp. So if you wanted to cut a steak with it, it probably wouldn't work. So as a project manager, you probably want to be quite versatile. Now look at something like a Swiss Army knife. We could probably butter a piece of toast with a Swiss Army knife. We've got a set of tweezers in there, and we've got a little set of scissors, and we've got a whole lot of other little things in there. And what you'd like to eventually become is somebody that is multi-skilled. You've got different tools at your, at your disposal. So that's a good question. So guys, I think that's most of the questions answered. I am going to wrap it up for the day. I just wanted to thank all of the guys that took some time out today to join me. I really appreciate your time, and I value your time. And moving forward, we will be doing a lot more of these webinars, and I look forward to the next one. And we'll start looking at going into some of these methodologies and having a look at some of the more nitty-gritty bits. So thank you very, very much. Very happy to have you guys here today, and I look forward to the next webinar. Thank you very much, and have a lovely afternoon further. Bye now.